Welcome to Evidence Based, a new Harbinger psychology podcast. I'm your host, Cassie Stossel. On today's episode, we're talking about couple skills with Dr. Betsy Chung, author of the Couple Skills Workbook. Betsy is a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice in California. She was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, to a culturally Chinese family. Currently, she is a relationship expert who splits her time between helping people strengthen their relationships in private practice, sharing her knowledge as a contributor to popular online media outlets, and serving as clinical director of Flow Wellness Hub, a holistic mental wellness practice in Huntington Beach, California. Hi, Betsy. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Cassie.
I'm really excited to talk about your book, and I thought we could sort of set the scene by talking about what is emotional security and why do we all need it?
So, for me, emotional security is basically a sense of safety that kind of like surpasses, the momentary safety. So, it's basically the sense that, like I have the capacity to deal with whatever is thrown at me in the future. And I really, relate that to relationship security just because, as humans, we are social animals, so we can't do anything, all completely by ourselves. And so, in order to have this emotional security, we need to be able to feel, strong and confident enough to take care of ourselves, handle situations as they come up. But sometimes when we're unable to handle things by ourselves, we also have supportive other people in our lives that we can, I guess like easily and safely rely on to kind of take some burdens off of us.
Yeah, that's really important, that community aspect. And a lot of your book dives a lot into our childhood and how that impacts how we are in relationship. Can you talk about the role that our childhood upbringing plays with like in a romantic dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, this is my thing. So for me, I see every human being as a kind of like a little child that I conceptualize, I guess, every human as a child that comes into this world knowing absolutely nothing. And it's kind of up to our parents or our early caregivers to help us kind of like fill in those blanks in order to later navigate the world. And so the kinds of experiences that we have in our early childhood relationships, that kind of forms this blueprint for us in terms of like what to expect later on from relationships, how to handle situations in the world. So for instance, like if we grew up in, very loving home environments, then generally we might expect that the world, is a safe place and that, we can, turn to people when we're in need. However, if we were, raised in very, unhealthy, toxic, abusive kinds of environments, we might expect the world to be kind of an unsafe place. And then on top of that, we might also, become, I guess, like assume that certain treatment that we received as children is considered normal. So, that when we're adults and we experience, similar maltreatment, it's almost like a normal thing for us. And we're more likely to want to stay in that relationship because we can't envision anything different from that versus somebody who maybe was raised by a warm and loving parent, or parents. They might in their adulthood seek similar relationships, and then when they're being mistreated, they'll be like, wait, that doesn't feel right, like that's not how I was treated, and I have a problem with that, and it kind of becomes a red flag. This isn't to say though that like our childhood relationships completely predetermine the kinds of relationships that we'll end up in. Lots and lots of factors contribute to the kinds of relationships that we choose and end up staying in. But generally though, people do kind of gravitate towards what feels normal. Some of us are lucky enough, for instance, to grow up in not the healthiest childhoods, but then lucky enough to meet somebody that does treat us well and that does, have the, I guess, patience to work with us and, stick by us. And in those situations, oftentimes we're able to I guess, like develop that, I guess, like what they call earned security, where, yeah, they are able to, embrace a healthier lifestyle for themselves.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because it feels like just a huge piece of this is that self awareness of understanding where your responses are coming from and be able to communicate them effectively with your partner.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, and I think that that has so much to do. I mean, of course, like I'm a psychologist, and so I'm going to be, I'm going to be biased, but I think that that's really part of the work of a therapist, is that
Hmm.
help people really make these connections between like their present relationships, their present experiences, and really trace them back to childhood in order to figure out, like, okay, like, when else did I feel like this, and what does that say about something that was unmet for me when I was a child. So yeah, like our childhood relationships, like really, like, again, like they're our first impression of the world. And because we have nothing else to compare it against, a lot of times that kind of just becomes like, okay, this is how life is, this is how the world works. And until we experience something differently, until we go to therapy and and get to kind of talk about these experiences, like, oh wow, I had no idea that that was not okay, I had no idea that that was abnormal. And oftentimes, like, even the therapeutic relationship in itself serves as a healthy model of a
Hmm.
relationship. So it's like, you've got a therapist that listens to you and validates you, that almost becomes this, like, somewhat of a new standard for relationships, where it's like, well, when I come here, like, this person listens to me and understands me, but when I go home,
Yeah.
like, it's everything is an argument. Right. And so
Hmm.
in those ways, like, we kind of start to be able to see, like, okay, like, what is the potential of relationships.
Yeah, I have two thoughts on all of that. One is that I just have to share this funny story with you. So I finished reading your book last week before I went to my romance book club, and we were talking about this book. And therapy is really well represented in this romance book. And so it was my turn to talk, and I was like suddenly talking about core childhood wounds. And I was like, oh, that's from reading Betsy's book right before this. And I was like, it's a good thing they're in therapy to talk about their childhoods.
That means a lot to hear, just because this is my first attempt at ever writing a book, and I was just like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to take like years and years of material and philosophies and organize them into a book. Like, I hope that it's making sense for people. So that means a lot that you were able to get something useful out of
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. And one thing this reminded me too of in my own life, this is sort of breaking generational patterns as well. But when I was growing up, I remember my mom being very vocal about not wanting to be like her mom, who sort of broke up their family when my mom was young and married a different man. And then my mom did the same thing around the age that like she was when it happened to her. And she kind of like turned her head after experiencing grief of her dad dying. And then I remember having this conversation with my now husband when my mom was really sick and she was dying. And I was like, what if I'm like her? Like, what if my response is to do what she did and what her mom did? And his first response was such a good one. It was like, well, you're aware of it. Like, you're talking about it right now. So you already like have a step ahead, like to not behave that way or to not have that response to something happening in your that happened in your childhood. So I thought that was really interesting and like a practical application of what we're talking about.
Yeah, that awareness, I feel, is just probably the most important thing that I think any person can get out of therapy. And you know, I really, really, truly believe that a lot of the work in therapy is already done in the first couple sessions of therapy, just because you're actually being made aware of certain things. Like sometimes, for instance, it's like, oh, it sounds like you're depressed, and that in itself, it can do so much for a client, because it's like, whoa, there's like, that's what depression is, like, that's what it looks like. And, so this thing that I've been feeling like there's something that can be done about that. And yeah, and very similarly, I, hear a lot of parents all the time that say the same thing. It's like, oh, I'm so worried that, I'm not going to be a good enough parent, that I'm going to repeat my parents, certain, like, yeah, I guess like painful patterns from my childhood. But I'm just like, the fact that you're even sitting here saying that already tells me that, you might be a little bit different. Of course, you're gonna, there's gonna be certain traits that are gonna come out that you're not gonna be aware of. But then there are also going to be a lot of things that you are going to be aware of. And so I think, actively working on those things is going to give a different outcome already in itself. Yeah.
Yeah. And as we're talking about that self awareness too, what can examining our own stress responses tell us in a romantic relationship?
Yeah, so I think that, everybody has their own stress slash fight or flight response. So, when we're children, we go through different experiences that might trigger, some sense of, I guess, threat. As adults, yes, like we're not constantly faced with like, imminent, threats where it's like life threatening or anything like that. But as children, what is life threatening for us is the loss of connection with our parents because we're completely defenseless. Like, as an infant, like if my mom or my father, abandoned me, then it's almost like there's nothing that can be done. You can't communicate. You don't know what's going on. All you know is that this sense of safety that somebody is going to meet all of my needs is now not with me. So like right now, for example, I am pregnant. I'm with my first baby.
Congratulations.
What was something that I recently learned is this term called total vitality, and that really gave so much deeper meaning to all of these things that I talk about in the book. And total vitality, I don't know if you've ever heard of the term before, but basically what it is that the fetus in the womb, they are provided with everything that they possibly need to survive. So they feel 100% safe inside the womb, or as safe as they'll ever be. When they come out into the world, that's where things become very traumatic because it's like suddenly I don't have this like, cozy, hug around me all the time. Like, what are these sounds? Like, what is, what's this like bright light? And so we really, really need, some, I guess, like some transition, some, I guess, like transitional object, such as, our parents to be able to feel like, okay, like that's familiar and now I feel safe. And so every time a little child loses that sense of connection with their primary caregiver, they it triggers a stress response because what that means is like crap, like I could die. And so as a result of that, like different types of experiences with our caregivers will elicit different kinds of responses. So like for example, let's just say that you have a very overwhelmed single parent as a parent. For you, like maybe you are working on a puzzle or something like that, and you want your parent to help you, but that parent gets upset at you, and or it seems like the parent's getting upset at you, but in reality what's going on is that mom or dad are just really exhausted and stressed from being a single parent. But to the child it's like, oh no, that upset my caregiver. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to learn how to adapt to that. I'm going to learn how to not ask them for help when I want to do something, because that makes me feel like I'm losing connection with them. And so these adaptations kind of become our coping skills, but then they're not always going to be the most adaptive coping skills because, yeah, like later on in life, we're not as reliant on our caregivers anymore or other people. So we're able to kind of get our needs met on our own. And so I think that, yeah, like, every time our stress response gets triggered, that oftentimes is, an opportunity for us to really kind of think about like, okay, what just happened here? Like, why did I respond in that way? And again, if we work with a professional who, can really kind of help us trace back Like, when's the last time that you felt this way? What does that mean about, what I guess safety needs were not met for you when you were a child? Oftentimes we're able to kind of like learn now as adults to meet those needs for us, right? So in the example that I gave, maybe the child needed some reassurance from the parent. I'm not mad at you. I still love you, but mommy or daddy, we're just really tired right now. Maybe give me 15 minutes and, I'll come and help you. That's an example of maybe like a message that we needed as children. We needed understanding for why our caregivers, were behaving in the way that they do, rather than like, oh, like it's because I'm annoying, because I'm such a burden to them.
Yeah, at the core of a lot of what we're talking about too is just this insecurity in relationship. And so, for the opposite of that, what does it look like when you feel secure in your relationship?
So I think that security in a relationship, we feel very free to be ourselves. And, there's just something that's really fulfilling about that, right? So when we feel free to be ourselves, we're not constantly worried about hiding certain parts of ourselves or acting in a certain way because we're always at the threat of losing this relationship. For instance, somebody who's in a secure relationship might not be afraid of conflict, because they trust that if I bring up this difficult issue, that my partner is going to be responsive to it, be receptive to it, and even if they don't agree, they're not going to abandon me. They're not going to find me annoying or something like that. Like, they'd be willing to kind of hear me out. As a result of, like having these kinds of dynamics, these partnerships just over time become stronger and stronger. And that also contributes to a sense of security as well, because it's like, I feel so confident in our relationship and in our partnership that, I trust us to basically overcome any challenges that might come to us. And I also feel so fulfilled, and I know that my partner feels so fulfilled, that, we have this level of understanding with each other that nobody else understands, and nobody else knows how to meet my needs, or meet their needs. So there's this sense of comfort and appreciation of the relationship that, we've kind of got each other's backs. And so I don't have to be afraid of what's going to, come to us in the future. If I even just kind of give a personal example, something that's been kind of scary for me a little bit is, being a new parent, right? In a couple of months, I'm going to be having a baby. And one thing that brings me a lot of comfort, though, is that, like it took me some time to kind of really work through this, but I was like worried because, it's going to be a really, really big change. And I've always been, somebody who's had so much control over my life. But then just what brings me comfort is just kind of thinking like, whatever it is that's going to happen, I trust that me and my husband can deal with it. Like and not just us. Like, we also have a very supportive families as well. So being able to just kind of trust that, like, what, like, yes, it is going to be really, really hard, but we'll get through it. Yeah. So that's what security, feels like in a relationship.
Yeah, that's really great. And I feel like, just on my personal note, like, I feel like I've gotten to a really good place in my relationship with that. And we were tested in a really, scary way. I had a cancer diagnosis last year. And, we've only been married going on 5 years. So, like, that's pretty young in a marriage to have to deal with something so heavy. And, unfortunately, my cancer involved like a feeding tube and like fully me having to turn over like all control to my husband, which I'm a control freak, type A, older daughter. Like, that was the hardest thing for me. And when I was talking to my therapist, like, I know he kept getting mad at me because I was just apologizing anytime he did something for me. Like, that was my immediate reaction, because I was like, like you're talking about feeling like too much or annoying or like a burden. And she was like, "Well, what can you do instead of that?" And so I started to say, "Thank you." instead of I'm sorry every time. Because that's what I, at the root of what I was trying to express was my gratitude, but I was apologizing instead. But now that we've been through something like that, like I think we've really reached that place of security, like what you're talking about with your husband and, anticipating this really big life change. And it's just like so different, like when you feel like you've gotten to that place of like, we'll get through it.
I guess I'm speechless to be able to, see that. Like, I'm so happy that you're able to, recover and, be here. Like, wow, that sounds
Thank
so
you. Yeah.
traumatic. But I think that, yeah, it's oftentimes those kinds of very, very taxing and challenging experiences that show us how to start relying on people. Like if we're the type of people that were raised to be very independent, or let's say that our parents had very high expectations for us to be independent from a young age, or maybe even possibly neglectful in certain ways, right? Like not to speak like badly of my mom or anything like that, but in Chinese culture, a lot of times, there's this like value for like, child prodigies, right? So my mom used to always gloat that like, oh, all of my kids were potty trained by like a year and a half. And we're just like, now looking back, I'm just like, that's not something to gloat about. Like, set your child up for failure because like if your child doesn't have that kind of control yet, you're just going to get mad at them for empathizing the fact that they don't have that kind of control yet, of their bodies. But yeah, like, I guess that this kind of goes even back to what we were saying about, how our childhood relationships can, you know, I guess create expectations for what to expect from relationships in the future, is that it also teaches us how to engage in relationships. So if we had caregivers that either had high expectations of us, so what I'm hearing is that you said that you're the oldest daughter, right? Very
Hmm.
often
Yeah.
the oldest children of families become the parentified child, not because they're bad parents that made them parentified children. It's just the circumstances oftentimes, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you end up like learning how to be extremely self sufficient, extremely independent, and you love that about yourself because, it's like, I can do life, like I'm confident. But at the same time, what it often also means is that we kind of suck at utilizing relationships. So, we suck at making space for our partners because we're so good at, taking care of ourselves. And I think often we don't realize is that we assume that like our partners like this about us because our parents like this about us. But in reality, what it does is that it makes them almost feel useless, like almost like we're not letting them contribute to the relationship. And that's not good for the relationship either, because I think that in a secure relationship, not only do we want to feel taken care of, we want to feel like our partners are also happy in the relationship because they feel taken care of too. It's complex, it goes both ways. It's not just about me feeling secure, but it's also all about like, does my partner also feel secure in the relationship, and what can I do to to foster more security between the two of us so that we're both happy in the relationship.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Fox, author of the Borderline Personality Disorder Workbook. When you first are diagnosed with BPD, or you're first told that you may have borderline personality disorder, it can be very frightening and overwhelming, because we have these ideas of what this disorder is, and you can feel trapped within it, trapped within this view or perspective of this thing that feels bigger than you and bigger than life. But the reality is that this is a disorder that can be managed, and that learning adaptive strategies can help you control it and do your life differently so that you determine the course of your life, not your BPD. To learn more and to sign up, go to bpdcourse.com.
New Harbinger online courses, self-help for everyone. So I want to get into talking about a concept in your book called emotional attunement. Can you talk about what that is and how couples can begin to develop that?
Yeah. So emotional attunement, I feel, is probably one of the most important emotional needs that every child, needs from their parents. Because as kids, like, again, like we don't have any ability to communicate with our caregivers what it is that's making us uncomfortable, what it is that we that we're struggling with. And so it's up to our caregivers to try to figure that out for us. And so emotional attunement really means that, it's like, one person's ability to kind of like almost like temporarily suspend their own feelings and perceptions and to put ourselves in the other person's place in order to try to understand, like, okay, what's going on here, what kind of needs does this other person have. So so of course it's not only related to, mother child relationships, because once we're able to, have this met for us as children, then naturally we can carry that along with us to other relationships and our adult romantic relationships too. Emotional attunement is it can be a learned skill. It's definitely a learned skill. But at the same time, I think that, some parents just, are going to be a little bit more naturally attuned to their children. When we're lucky enough to have it, then of course, we're able to empathize more with other people. But if not, we can learn how to develop that by kind of similarly, like I said, like suspending your own thinking, right? So every time you see that, let's say your partner is upset about something, let's say that you told a joke and your intention was not to upset them, but they seem to be really triggered by something that you said, rather than jumping into your own defense and saying like, oh, you're so sensitive, you take things so personally, I didn't even mean that. Really being able to kind of suspend your own thinking and try to think like, okay, if I put myself into the shoes of my partner, what was offensive about that? And if we're unable to figure it out, be curious, right? So we're so like, I really didn't mean to hurt you, but I can see that I did. Can you help me understand where that might come from? And so the more that we're able to engage in this kind of empathy and curiosity in our partners, and their emotions, the better that we're able to communicate with them in the future, be more sensitive to their needs, know what to say, what not to say. And so and so as a result of that, there's going to be less conflict between the two people because we know, like, okay, like I hear you. And once, the other person feels heard, they also are going to be naturally less defensive about situations as well. So yeah, emotional attunement, it's really, really important because it's what allows us to understand each other deeply and get our needs met more efficiently.
Yeah, and that being heard and being seen is just the core of what we all want, right? Like that makes total sense. And you mentioned the term empathy, and I want to know more about how empathy in relationship can build upon that intimacy.
Yeah, so when we can empathize with somebody, we're really, really able to understand deeply, who they are and why something might hurt them. And so when we're able to do that, then we're also able to kind of naturally adjust to, I guess, like interact with them in a healthier way. What that also does is that by being empathetic to other people, it also sometimes teaches them to be more empathetic towards us as well. And so I think that, yeah, like empathy, it really allows us to just understand each other on a much deeper level. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I really enjoyed in your book, the emotionally reparative apology. And I think that is a really powerful concept. And you talk about there being four parts to this. Can you talk about what one of these emotionally reparative apologies look like?
Yeah. So, sometimes, like, when we hurt somebody unintentionally, what ends up happening is that, the other person was made to feel unsafe in a particular situation. And, while saying sorry about something, it does somewhat acknowledge like that, okay, I hurt you. Oftentimes it might not necessarily be enough, in order to, I guess, repair a particular situation. Because if it's not communicated specifically, why I hurt you, and like, or what I did to hurt you, and what I'm going to do from here on out in order to not hurt you anymore, then oftentimes the person that suffered the hurt might not be able to kind of like drop their guard. Being able to offer an emotionally reparative apology would look like, first, an acknowledgement of the person's feelings, an acknowledgement of understanding like why this person was hurt by the particular actions. It can also involve some level of empathy as well, right? Like, if I put myself into your shoes, this is how I would feel in this particular situation. So I understand why that hurt you. And this is what I'm going to do in order to not hurt you in the same way again. And oftentimes, on the receiving end, when we're able to see like, okay, this person really, really understands like the impact of what they did, that allows us to be able to kind of drop our guards and be able to re-engage with them, because we trust now, like they know, like, versus like if it's just like, oh, I'm sorry, even if the sorry sounds genuine, if we're not being specific about why we're sorry and what we're going to do in order to avoid hurting the other person that way again, then it's really hard for that other person to really, really believe, like, do you really know what you did?
Yeah, yeah, and apologies can just be so empty without that acknowledgement of why, how it's going to change moving forward. So I just love the concept of that. And on a side tangent, I've been watching a lot of Love Island, and they are very bad at apologizing. They could use your book and this section in particular. Another concept you talk about is unconditional acceptance. Why is that a core emotional need, and what does that look like in relationship?
So, unconditional acceptance basically means that, we accept our partners basically, for how they are. We don't try to, change them in any way in order to fit some sort of a mold that we had. We're able to kind of appreciate the qualities that, that we do appreciate, but then the qualities that we might not have found desirable are things that we also accept and are willing to work with. And I think that unconditional acceptance is just so, so important, because if we criticize our partners, or if we make our partners feel like there's certain parts of them that are unacceptable to us, then what ends up happening is that they're no longer feeling safe in the relationship. So let's just take, I don't know, smoking, for example, right? Like, let's just pretend that I absolutely hate it when my partner smokes. If I'm going to constantly be on my partner about that, then maybe my partner's going to feel like, okay, I need to hide this, and I can't do this in front of her anymore. And so every time they go out and they need to need a smoke break or something like that, they're going to like freak out, and it's like, oh, do I still smell it on me? And that ends up becoming one part of themselves that they feel like they need to hide from the relationship, and then they're not able to just be their full authentic selves. Now, does this mean that smoking is condoned or that I like it? No. But it just simply means that, what, like, that's not something that I should try to control. I can express to them how it makes me feel. I don't like the smell of it, or, I don't like to kiss you when you smoke cigarettes or something like that. However, when we make our partners feel like there's something wrong with them as a result of that, then that kind of starts already to create this like lack of authenticity. And very easily that becomes this like snowball effect where it's like, okay, well, if I'm hiding this, that means I have to hide that. I have to hide that. So when we're constantly needing to feel like in a relationship, like we need to hide certain parts of ourselves, we lose the sense of autonomy, the sense of freedom to, be ourselves. And if we go back to what we were talking about emotional security, we don't really get to feel that fulfillment in the relationship where it's like, oh, I really appreciate this relationship because of how comfortable I feel in it.
Hmm. And how can vulnerability help us get to that unconditional acceptance?
So, I mean, basically, in the very same way, like vulnerability allows us to take these little risks in order to, show the parts of ourselves that we had worried were unacceptable growing up. So, let's just say that growing up, I was very sensitive because, my mom teased me a lot, and so, every time I cried, after a joke that she would tell, I would be called sensitive. So, as a result, in our adult relationships, if my partner were to tell me, jokes that might hurt my feelings, I might want to pretend that it doesn't hurt my feelings because I'm worried that, he's just going to call me sensitive and say that I can't take jokes. Being vulnerable might be like, you know what? I'm going to take that risk and I'm going to be honest with my partner about how that made me feel and trust that my partner is not going to reject me or make me feel like I'm too sensitive because of it. And so when we're able to, I guess, show these parts of ourselves and be honest, in our relationships about our feelings and who we are and what's okay, not okay for us, what that does is that it allows us to truly, truly feel accepted as, for like our whole selves. So, as a child, if I felt like, the sensitive part of me needed to be hidden, as an adult, if I show this part of me and my partner loves me anyway, then I would feel that unconditional love, that unconditional acceptance. And I mean, the truth is that, as even in childhood, if I continue to be sensitive, right? Like I'm sure that my caregiver would have still loved me and they wouldn't have abandoned me, but I didn't know that. Right. So I think that, yeah, like as children, we again learn how to adapt to certain situations. Like, oh, if that, behavior caused my caregiver to reject me or, or distance themselves from me, then I'm going to stop engaging in that behavior. And, again, in adulthood, in order to truly, truly feel secure in a relationship, we need to find that courage to test out those narratives that we held on to, because if not, again, we're going to continue to hide certain parts of ourselves and, constantly be vigilant about like, oh, I can't show that, oh, I can't show that, oh, I need to be careful about this thing that I'm saying right here.
Yeah, so in our conversation, we've talked a lot about getting to a secure point. We've talked about unconditional acceptance. What are some ways that you recommend for couples to foster warmth in their relationships?
So many things to that couples can do, but I one thing that I would say is just listening to each other. I think giving each other space to to talk and to express their feelings and being able to kind of listen to them from what we call like a compassionate lens. So, what that might look like is, being able to sometimes recognize like what are certain things sometimes that I might do that might cause me to have this like adversarial interaction with my partner, or what are some things that that I might do that might discourage I guess connection with my partner, and to really kind of think about those things. Like, so for example, like, do I constantly shoot down my partner's ideas? When my partner tries to share something with me, am I open and interested in what they're trying to share with me, or am I just always kind of busy doing my own thing? So when we kind of start to, notice like, okay, like what are our, behaviors around our partners? And what if I were to start to tell myself that like this person has a lot of value and I want to learn from this person. I want this person to have a contribution in our relationship. What that naturally will do by shifting our perceptions and shifting our lens is that it allows us to, not only see our partners as very valuable beings, but it also helps our partners feel like they're very, very valuable in the relationship as well. As a result of that, when there's this like, kind of positive perception of each other, naturally we start to feel a lot more warmth in the relationship, like a lot more love in the relationships. Like I appreciate this person and I see this person as somebody who can contribute a lot to the relationship versus like, I don't really trust this person. I don't think that they have, anything of value to add or anything like that, which creates more of this, I guess, like, again, like adversarial kind of like, competitive relationship.
Mhm. Yeah, I love the concept of warmth too. And I think that's just such a beautiful way to put it. And I think that's a good place for us to wrap up, actually, unless you have any final thoughts for our listeners.
No, I mean, thank you so much for your time. I had a wonderful time talking to you, and I'm also, really, really happy to, hear that you're also in a very loving and secure relationship as well.
Yes. Thanks so much for your time and for your book. Like I mentioned, I've gotten a lot out of it, and I'm even reading fiction books through the lens of the concepts you introduced. So I really appreciate it. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Boost your relationship IQ and learn essential skills for relationship success. Do you ever feel like your romantic partner is on a completely different page? Are your arguments becoming more frequent and difficult to recover from emotionally? Do you feel disconnected and long for that trust, intimacy, and connection you once shared? Despite our culture's obsession with effortless fairy tale romances, the real truth is that most relationships take work. Written by a psychologist and based on the most effective couples therapies, the Couple Skills Workbook will show you how to boost your relationship IQ by cultivating greater self awareness, as well as an increased awareness of your partner's needs. With this how to guide, you'll learn how to better navigate conflict, reconnect after fights, nurture intimacy, and build a solid foundation for a secure and loving relationship. By showing empathy, being both an active listener and an assertive communicator, and embracing your own vulnerability, you can increase your relationship IQ, gain a deeper understanding of your partner, and set the stage for lasting bliss. This workbook will show you how step by step. Visit our website at www.newharbinger.com and use coupon code podcast25 to receive 25% off your entire order. New Harbinger Publications is an independent, employee-owned publisher of books on psychology, health, spirituality, and personal growth. For over 50 years, our evidence-based self-help books and pioneering workbooks have helped readers make positive changes to improve mental health and well-being. Founded by psychologists Matthew McKay and Patrick Fanning, New Harbinger is proud to be an employee-owned company. Our books reflect our core values of integrity, sustainability, compassion, and trust. Written by leaders in the field and recommended by therapists worldwide, New Harbinger books are practical, accessible, and provide real tools for real change. The best continuing education training does more than just fulfill requirements. It opens your mind to new possibilities, increases your confidence, and gives you powerful tools to transform your clients' lives. Praxis Continuing Education and Training partners with world-class experts to create cutting-edge, evidence-based courses for mental and behavioral health professionals. Learn how to heal trauma with Robin Walzer, explore values with Kelly Wilson, and master the basics of acceptance and commitment therapy with Matt Boone through an on-demand course. Or join experts and like-minded professionals live to take your practice to a new level. Find your next training opportunity at praxiscet.com. That's praxiscet.com. Do you have an idea for another episode? Do you want to send us a message? Our email address is podcast@newharbinger.com. We'd love to hear from you. This podcast was edited by Jesse Fancushion. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love if you rated, reviewed, and subscribed to the show, and we hope that you might share it with anyone who could benefit from the content. This podcast is not a substitute for counseling with a licensed provider.